My name is Paul Fowler, Vice President of Corporate Finance here at Red Cloud, and joining me today, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Luis Tondo, on the right-hand side of your screen, President and CEO for Coro Mining, and Nick Bias, the Vice President of Corporate Development and Investor Relations. Before we kick off the presentation, I'll just take a moment to explain the agenda for today and how you can participate, obviously. Overall, we anticipate this will take about 40 to 45 minutes. It will start with a brief 20-minute presentation, which includes reference to some of the recent highly significant drill results that many of you may have seen last week. We'll follow that with a Q&A session that Luis and Nick will lead, lasting approximately 20 minutes. We'll ask questions that have already been submitted online. Hopefully, many of you listening today have had the chance to do so, and any which arise during the presentation. Which brings me to how you can participate as well. You'll see on the right-hand side of the screen here a chat box. So to ask questions while Luis and Nick are presenting, please type them into the chat box on your screen, and we'll do our best to answer all of the questions that arise in the time we have available. Before I hand over to Luis and Nick, I'd like to quickly mention some of the other services that Red Cloud provide that could ultimately help you, hopefully, familiarize yourself with Coro if you're interested. You will find on the host page for the webinar a link to our research notes that we publish, which anyone is able to read, and we certainly invite you to do so. All you have to do is sign in with a valid email address. We frequently also organize investor meetings with Luis and Nick in various North American cities. So I would encourage you to get in touch with your Red Cloud representative, or even me, or even indeed the company directly, if you have interest in attending future presentations by Coro in North America. You'll also find a webinar playback available on our website. You'll receive a link to the playback from an email address, Red Cloud Webinars shortly. And again, you can find the link on our website. You can also, of course, contact the company directly on their website or by contacting Nick Bias, who I shall now hand over to. So thank you very much again today for participating in today's event. And I'd now like to introduce Nick Bias, Vice President of Corporate Development and Investor Relations.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And good evening, everybody from London. My name is Nick Bias, and I manage corporate development and investor relations at Coro. As Paul mentioned, leading the call today will be Luis Tondo, our CEO in Santiago. But before I pass the call to Luis to talk about some of our strong results and the exciting months we have ahead, I thought I might set the scene a little bit for Coro, especially for those of you that are new to the story. Looking back, I think it's just about a year now since we announced our financing plan, which provided the funds we needed to transform Coro into a business focused on our Marimeca project. As a memory refresh, Coro is a Canadian-quoted copper explorer, leading the exploration charge with our Marimeca copper oxide project, which is located in the Antofagasta region of Chile. Quoted on the TSX, our market cap today is around 140 million Canadian dollars. Good progress this year as the share price has already doubled. Our shares are held by some of the best known and respected names in the business, notably two private equity funds out of London called Greenstone and Tembo, some of the best names in Toronto, including Mackenzie and Dundee, and many private shareholders such as yourselves across North America and Europe. Much of the success we have earned this last year follows the $36 million we raised this time last year. The first 10 million we raised in a premium placement to Tembo Capital. Actually, now I look back, I think we may have made Canadian capital markets history that day, as concurrent with that placement, we also announced and priced a rights offering to all shareholders. That rights offering was filled and raised $26 million in total. The actual funds themselves have been, and indeed still are, being applied to advance our Marimeca project. We did three things. First, we acquired or optioned ground in and around the Marimeca project to increase and secure our land footprint as we expand our exploration activities. Second, we repaid debt so that we will be a debt-free company. Third, and perhaps most interesting and indeed pertinent to today's call, we've applied almost $12 million to a phase 2 exploration program at Marimeca. We had already established a 76 million ton copper oxide resource at a pretty healthy 0.5% grade, but we were confident that there was much more. And so with these funds, since the end of last year, we've been exploring the ground adjacent to the Marimeca phase 1 area, and slowly and surely we've been releasing strong results, demonstrating that the scale of the project is growing along with the resource. Marimeca is an exceptional project, and bit by bit, as we do a little bit more marketing and events like this webinar today, the word is getting out. As Luis likes to say, with Marimeca, we have a jewel in our hands. So with that, let me finish my introduction and let Luis take you through his presentation and explain in his own words why Marimeca is such an interesting investment opportunity. Luis, let me please hand the call over to you now.
Thanks, Nick. Good day, everybody. Thanks for joining us in our first webinar. So let's go straight for the presentation. So we are Coro. We are a junior mining company that is listed in TSX. We are dedicated in the discovery and exploration of copper deposits in Chile. Chile is still the best jurisdiction in South America to do exploration and mining, and I'll tell you why. We are going to focus on our flagship project, which is called Marimeca. And Marimeca is exactly what you are seeing on the slide, on the photo. That hill is going to be an outcropping open pit mine. And I'll talk about its location, a bit of its geology, and the resource that we have nowadays, and what we envisage for the future in terms of coming up with a new geological model, which should happen by Q3 of this year. For those not familiar to Chile, we are in the northern part of the country, where we call it the second region, close to the cities of Antofagasta and Mejillones. We are in the coastal copper belt. That means that we are not in high altitude. The maximum altitude that we've got in Marimeca is like 1,000 meters. So this is a project that is very close to the coast. It's not what happens to other projects that you may hear about, which are in the high Andes. And being high altitude in Chile means a lot of more effort to develop a project like that. That's not going to be the case of Marimeca because we are in a superb location. And the next slide shows you the infrastructure that is present nearby the project. So as said, Marimeca, the Marimeca claims are these red rectangles that you can see. Although Coro has got much more land position, we are focusing on the central part. As I said, the altitude maximum is 1,000 meters, and in the region we've got a number of infrastructure that will make the project development a much easier task than you would compare to other projects elsewhere. Being close to Mejillones means that we are close to a very busy port in Chile. Mejillones nowadays, for instance, is a port that receives most of the sulfuric acid for distributing the mining industry in the country. And sulfuric acid is one of the most important consumables that you are going to be using in terms of Marimeca, since this is going to be a copper oxide deposit which needs to be processed by heap leaching using sulfuric acid. So we are close to the port. We are close to highways and railways. We are close to Antofagasta, which is known as the copper capital in the country, which means that also for developing a project like that, the capex is not going to be so intensive. For instance, being close to Antofagasta means that we are going to have access to manpower without needing to build a camp close to the project. In terms of infrastructure close to a port and close to the sea, where one of the major items that we should get for a project like that is water. And as I said, other projects that are not close to the coast, they have to put pipelines to get water to site, like when you are up in the Andes. That's not going to be the case for Marimeca. We are in 14 kilometers in a straight line to the sea. Therefore, we can get very, very good access to water. Being a very well-located place like this, one may ask if the project is going to be the size as we think Marimeca is going to be, how come nobody else has found it before? And if you look nearby the project, you have other operations like Mantos de la Luna, as you can see on the top of the slide, Michilla, and probably the best known deposit that you see or operation that you can see close to Marimeca is Manto Blancos. Manto Blancos used to be owned by Anglo American in the past, and now it's owned by a private company called Manto Copper. And when they started, they have 150 million tons of oxides as resources. And as Nick said, the Marimeca for phase 1 exploration, we have already identified something like 76 million tons. So we're already half of the size of Manto Blancos. Again, it begs the question, why a project that is going to have the magnitude as we think it is going to have had never been found before? Being a very accessible place like the coastal belt and close to a very good infrastructure like close to Antofagasta. We answered this question with a little bit of geology. And you can see in this slide where the Marimeca deposit is hosted on this kind of reddish rock. This we call intrusive rock, while all the other projects that are in the slide are hosted in this kind of bluish rock, which has got a type of rock which we call volcanics. So if you go to Chile and you ask a geologist in the country to look for decent sized copper deposits in the coastal belt where we are located, that there is a preconceived geological model that all of the geologists would look for a deposit like that in volcanic rocks. And as I said, Marimeca is hosted by intrusive rock. Now, intrusive rocks are typically more competent rock, less permeable, and therefore any copper occurrence or any copper deposit that you may have in this kind of rock are vein type deposits, which are narrow and typically at a small size. Now, what happened to Marimeca that at the end it became with the magnitude that we have today? In the next slide, you have a surface mapping of the ground in Marimeca. And what is shown there is a structural system which are made of parallel fractures that run from north to south. And on top of that, we've got also some cross-cutting ground with dikes that run from the northeast, southwest, and also northwest and southeast directions. And what all this structural system created was a number of cracks on the ground, on the rock, that at the end created the permeability that otherwise an intrusive rock like that wouldn't have. And through these cracks, through this fracturing on the rock, is where it was possible, or it created the permeability that later on the mineralized solutions that came with the primary mineralization managed to get through the rock and impregnate the mass, creating the Marimeca deposit with the magnitude that we are talking about. We believe that this is a new geological setup in the area, and a model that is going to be, once understood, is going to be followed by other companies and other geologists to try to find other Marimeca type of deposits elsewhere in the coastal belt. And we are lucky to be the first to pick that up. The other tool or the other methodology that worked very well for us in the area was geochemistry. And what you can see here in this slide is the geochemical signature of a geochemistry campaign that was run in the recent past, where it's shown in the darker spots are the ones that return copper grades over 500 ppm. We call a geochemical anomaly. And that was done by sampling rock, because the rock is outcropping the area, and sending that to the lab so that we would test that for copper. What can be seen clearly here in this picture is that there is a north-south trend. The geochemical work is showing that the mineralized zones also extended to the north and to the south of this central area, which we call the Marimeca 1 to 23 claim, and that's where we started all the work back in 2016. Okay, with the information that we got from the geochemical work, we then had the knowledge, or we had the expectation that the geological potential for the Marimeca 1 to 23 claim extended over a district size. So what you can see in this picture here is a district that is like 4.5 kilometer by 5 kilometer in area. And that's with the information that we had from the geochemical campaign, we developed a strategy to start acquiring additional land around and close to Marimeca so that we could increase our geological potential on the exploration side. And that's what we did. It took like 18 months for consolidating all the areas in the region. So we started buying the areas that were to the north and to the south, and then finally we got the red area that you can see, which was enough for starting all this exploration campaign, which we call phase 2. So we had the land, we had the knowledge, we needed the funds to conduct exploration, and that's when what Nick mentioned, we raised an amount of money last year, and we actually divided the whole campaign in 3 phases. Phase 1 being what was done from 2016 to 2018, so that was complete. And phase 2, doing drilling or extra exploration in areas adjacent to Marimeca, which is actually just finished. The drilling is finished. We are just now compiling the results. And what is ongoing right now is phase 3, which has to do with some scout drilling to the northern area, which is composed by Cedro Limpo. And also we're going to be doing some scout drilling in Serra Sorpresa to the south, on the southern part of Marimeca. Last year, we also, once we come up with the program, we put forward a table, this table that you can see here, where we clearly show to the market the objectives that we had on the exploration program. In the columns, what you can see are each one of those areas that I showed in the previous slide. And on the roads, you can see all the tests that we have to accomplish up to the point where we're going to start releasing drilling results to the market, some preliminary reports. And in here, we established 2 main milestones for the program. One is to release the geological resource model update for phase 2, which is due to Q3 this year. And then with the results of this updated resource model, the idea is to conduct a PA, a preliminary economic analysis, during Q4 to be published in Q1 next year. So those are the 2 main milestones. All the other milestones that you can see on the table, the ones that are color are already met, and the ones that are in white are the ones that are forecast, and we are pretty much on track on this program for the exploration. So how big we believe Marimeca is going to be? In this picture here, you see the area that is covered by the drilling of phase 2. Inside this yellow circle is where we publish our current resource, the resource that we have for phase 1, which are the 76 million tons at 0.5% total copper. And then with all the drilling that has already been done in phase 2, we were able to extend the mineralized zone, which is shown also in the picture. And this mineralized zone nowadays comprises of 1,400 meters of strike length by 800 meters wide. And in terms of how thick is the oxidation package, we consider an average of 120 meters. And if you consider also a rock density of 2.6 and multiply all these figures, you would come up with a resource number that is exceeding 200 million tons, which is the minimum target that we believe that we are going to get once we do all the model update. So the question is going to be also the grade that's going to come up with all this tonnage. We believe that that's going to be similar to what we've got on the resource from phase 1, which is 0.5% total copper. So, as I said, the idea is that we're going to be confirming all these numbers once we release the updated model in Q3 this year. I'll show you some geological sections of the drilling that's already been carried out. And here, what you can see is that we've got mineralization from surface. So again, this is going to be a deposit that's going to be open pitable and with a very low strip ratio. As the mineralization starts from surface with good grades, we anticipate that we won't have a lot of waste to deal with when we start mining it. Another cross-section of the area, and you see the same patterns of good assays, good grades coming from surface. In this slide here, you can appreciate the block model that was developed during phase 1. And right in the middle of the slide, you have a vertical line that kind of divide what is the ground towards to the left side, which is for phase 2. And clearly it shows that the model is going to extend to the northwest portion, as is shown by the drilling data that we've got so far. Showing some pictures on Marimeca, looking northwest, northeast to the Marimeca side. Again, you can see some artisanal mining that was going on in the past. There are some adits. In fact, we were able, and we had the luxury to actually access underground workings from previous artisanal mining. We also did sampling, and those results are as good as drilling, and those results will also be used for coming up with this updated model. When I talked about the parallel fracture system, you can appreciate that in this picture. It runs like north to south, parallel fracturing, and also dipping 50 degrees to the east. Typically, you wouldn't see the copper oxide, the green that you can see on the area, on the photo. But in that case, in Atacama, usually, it never rains. In this case, once we've taken this picture, that was after a rainstorm event, which is very rare. And once it washed off the dust from the walls, you could see the green from the copper oxide minerals. Another picture showing some RC drilling that was going on in the Atómica ground. It's one area that's adjacent to Marimeca. Another picture that shows again all this parallel fracturing system, clearly shown on the picture. Our main copper oxide mineral that we find in the deposit is called brockentite. I'll talk a bit on the geological model in the next slides. And this is a very good photo that one can appreciate how close we are to the Mejillones Bay. On the back, you can actually see the Pacific Ocean. And again, it's a 14-kilometer straight line to the coast, which will make, getting water, for instance, for the project, very, let's say, a very facilitated task. I'll talk about some of the geological modeling that was done. So in this picture, we show the official resource figures for phase 1. So considering a cutoff grade of 0.1% in the first line, you can see that the total measure indicated inferred resource are around 75.9, 76 million tons at 0.51% total copper. In the left side of the slide, you can see the geological model. And as I said, the main copper oxide mineral that we have in the deposit is composed by a core of brochantite. And then we have a second one, which is chrysocolla. Chrysocolla is like a halo around the brochantite. And in the periphery, we have wad. Metallurgically speaking, brochantite leaches very well in heap leach with sulfuric acid. We typically can have recoveries between 75 or even 80% on brochantite. For chrysocolla, it typically leads to recovery around 70 to 75%. And what can be a bit more difficult to leach, between 45 to 55. But overall, in the deposit, as we have much more brochantite in chrysocolla, we estimate that the metallurgical recoveries for the future project will be around 70 to 75%. In terms of acid consumption, we've done met test work when we did the feasibility study for phase 1 last year. And that test work showed acid consumptions in the range of 30 to 40 kilos per ton of processed ore, which I consider to be in the moderate side for acid consumption. So based on the geological modeling that was conducted, we then developed the block model, which you can see in the right side of this picture. You can see there is also a hard boundary in the left side of the block model that was actually imposed last year because at that time we didn't own the adjacent land. And after that we got the land, we already done the drilling, and clearly the model will extend to the left side. And so we want to come up exactly with the updated block model once we finish the calculation of the resource for Q2. Here we have some, a plan view of the underground workings. As I mentioned, that was for Atómica. We were able to access the underground workings, the adits that were present from our previous artisanal mining. And our geologists, they actually sampled and both sides of the adits, and like a channel sampling. And every 2 meters, we collect samples, sent to the lab, and you can see we come up with a very nice copper grades. And this is also going to be used for modeling the new resource, coming up with a new resource model. Another plan view showing all the areas, and what we can see here is also on the red traces are what the geologists mapped as the main feeders for the primary mineralization that later got impregnated all the rock, and the rock got oxidated so that we created the oxide deposit. Another plan view of the area, another cross-section now showing that we now are able to identify 3 main zones. The oxide top zone, which you can see the thickness of the oxide zone goes anywhere between 400 meters thick up to 100 meters. So on the average, a weighted average figure is something like 120 meters of oxidation from surface. And then following the oxide zones, you have a typical mix and a rich zone. And recently, we've been able to start pinching what we call the primary zone. I'll talk about that in some next slide. Last year, we published probably the best set of results we got from our drilling for phase 2. And what those results shown were what you can see in this picture. We've been able to identify 5 what we call high-grade cores or high-grade zones. One that is present in the high-grade zone Marimeca area, which is the one that was targeting phase 1 exploration. And the other 4 are actually in the areas that are adjacent to Marimeca. And the main one being a central one, which is mostly present in the Atahualpa ground. So in this picture, you can see basically 3 things. One is the extension mineralization again, which, as I said, is going to be in terms of length 1,400 meters by 800 meters wide and 120 meters in thickness. The second feature are these high-grade zones, and by high-grade zone, I consider any ore that has got a grade that's going to be over 1%. That means double the grade that we've got in our regional resource base. And the third point is that underneath these high-grade zones, especially in the northern area, we were able to start pinching for the first time more consistently the primary mineralization. By primary mineralization, I'm talking about chalcopyrite with very good grades that are over 1% and sometimes even 1.5%. And here in this cross-section, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So as we go from east to west, the drill holes, the length of the drill holes, because now the oxidation zone gets less thick, they were able to go through the oxidation zone into the mixed zone and then into the primary zone. That hadn't happened so much in the Marimeca to the east, because in there, the oxidation zone is actually thicker. So the amount of drilling or the drilling length that was done at the time in that zone was only able to pinch mostly oxides. But now as you go to the northern zone, we were able to get into the sulfide. So with all these results, what we are aiming to do, as I said, is a PEA. And in terms of what that could be, what could result from a preliminary economic analysis as we are going to be running and I'm going to talk about very high-level ballpark numbers here. That's what we believe that could result, but we have to confirm all that with proper engineering studies. Now, so if you take at least 200 million tons of oxide at a grade of 0.5% total copper, and you apply, let's say, a recovery of 75%, so you'd have 1 million tons of copper in situ, and with the recovery, you could have something like 700,000 tons of recoverable copper. With that kind of resource, that could actually sustain a mine plan, and let's pick a number here, a minimum mine life of 10 years. You could be producing with 700,000 tons of recoverable copper, 70,000 tons per year of cathodes for a mine life of 10 years. A project of that size in Chile, and again, bear in mind that we are in a very good location, you would be able to build probably with a capex of around $450 million. And I think in technical terms, I think the project in itself, there is very low risk. As I said, we are in an area with very high infrastructure, so we don't need to spend a lot of money bringing water to site. We don't need a camp because we can get people from Antofagasta and commute people by bus every day. So therefore, in terms of capex, it's going to be a lower intensive project. In terms of, as I said, in terms of technical risk, I see that a very low risk project. and probably the risk that Coro has got as a company right now at the market cap that we have, which is about 140 million Canadian. I think the main challenge would be how Coro could finance this. So the appearance of these high-grade zones are going to be a game change in that regard. And why? Because obviously, if you have high-grade zones that have got as much as double the head grade as you would have in the original resource, from 0.5 to 1%, that means that we could develop, and when you run the mine plan optimization, the sequence that you're going to come up is going to be that these high grades are going to be first target for mining. So all your starting pits will be starting in these high grade zones. Therefore, if you now are processing an ore that has got 1% total copper and not 0.5 as you had before, you could go along and produce the same amount of copper, as I mentioned before, 70,000 tons per year, with more or less half of the tonnage of processed ore to come up with the same production. That should have a direct impact on the CapEx requirements and the initial CapEx requirements, and therefore the $400 million figure that I just mentioned that would cost for the whole project to be built with the use of the high-grade zones, that CapEx is going to be reduced quite considerably. And therefore, the risk that I was mentioning that Coro as a company could not finance to start this project, I think has reduced quite a lot now with the appearance of the high-grade zones. Obviously, a project like that with this magnitude is also bringing the attention of other companies, bigger companies. Coro has been approached, so that companies, they want to look at more closely to the data. And there is always the opportunity that this may end up in a merger and acquisition activity. The focus that we have now as a company is not engaged into such discussions, at least up to the point where we actually have got enough information to understand what we have in our hands. And as Nick mentioned, that's what I used to say. Marimeca is a jewel, is in a very premium jurisdiction. Chile continues to be the best jurisdiction to do or to conduct mining activities in South America. We are proving that we still can find good projects in Chile, despite the common sense that good project would only be located in the Andes, deeper, and so on. We actually found Marimeca in the coastal belt near a jurisdiction, near a region that is with superb infrastructure. So what we want to do now is to follow our plan, to come up with a resource update, to come up with the results of a PEA that will put a value on the project, and then we'll see what options we have as a company, which may end up in selling this project for a bigger company if the price is right, or starting developing it now that we've got the appearance of the high-grade zones, which will allow us to finance the project initially. We could start with a stage that will produce the same amount of copper, but requiring less capex, less tonnage to be processed. And later in the mine life, then you would expand it again so that when the grade goes down, you could keep up with the same production. I think that ends my presentation, and I'm okay for answering questions.
Great, wonderful. Thanks very much, Luis. So I'll attempt to run through a couple of questions here that we've received online and prior to the broadcast today. You answered a couple of them. We had a few inquiries in respect to the impact that the high-grade zones have had on future economics. I think you covered that off quite nicely. we've had a couple of questions in respect to the recent sulfide discovery, as I'll call it. Can you tell us what you know so far about it and potentially metallurgy, if anything, and just some rough ideas at this stage in terms of what impact that might have on the ultimate scope of the project?
Yeah, well, the results that we've got for the sulfide primary ore are specifically from the northern region, where we are able to, as I said, to pinch, some good results are typically over 1%, some are 1.5% total copper. We know that the primary sulfide mineral is chalcopyrite. Chalcopyrite responds very well to flotation. So it's a totally different processing route that need to be implemented. It's another plant. So this is going to be another project. Obviously, how the Marimeca is going to be developed is going to be with a heap leach operation that will target the oxide and mixed zone. The mixed material can also be processed with good recoveries. You just have to take care during the engineering phase that you allow for some process adjustments to do that, but you can also get good recoveries from mixed material. And the sulfide is going to be, as I said, a totally new project that needs to be fully investigated. There has to be a drilling campaign that is specific for that. But the good thing is that it opens up a total new scenario for Coro that before was mostly focusing on the oxide side of the equation. And now we know that we have more, at least we detected the sulfide. Now the question is going to be how big these sulfide zones would become. Pretty much we understand that they may be very well correlated to the high-grade cores. So I would expect that in terms of tonnage, we would have at least the same amount of ore, of primary ore that we have as oxide in the high-grade cores. But it opens up a total new opportunity for Coro, and that will add a lot of extra value to the whole project.
Excellent. It's exciting stuff. I'd also like to ask if you could tell us a little bit about your funding program. Obviously, you've had a very active drill program in the last 12 months at least. What's coming up for the rest of the year in terms of how much drilling you're doing and how long are you effectively funded for that program?
Yeah, we are fully funded to finish all the program that we put in place. That means finishing phase 2, which we've done the drilling already. What we have to do now is just a compilation of the information and come up with the resource update in Q3, as I mentioned. And then what is going on right now is the drilling for phase 3, which has to do with scout drilling in the southern and in the northern part of the area, which, by the way, it's like 2 kilometers to the north and 2 kilometers to the south of the central area, Marimeca. So it's a large district scale. And we are fully funded to finish this. And obviously, depending on the results of that program, which should come up by end of this year, then we have to plan for what's going to be the next stage. But for this year, we are, as I said, we are fully funded.
Thanks. I think one of the things that I'm not sure people fully understand is the pros and cons of having such a large part of your capital structure in the hands of two key shareholders. I'm referring, of course, to Greenstone and Tembo. Could you talk a little bit about that and perhaps explain the pros and cons that comes with that?
Shall I take that question, Luis?
Yeah.
Okay. So Greenstone and Tembo are two of the best respected private equity firms in the mining investment business. They're both based out of London, and they bring tremendous corporate finance and technical skills to our business. Greenstone owns just over 55% and Tembo just over 15%. Greenstone has been invested in us for about 4 years now, and Tembo came in last year in the premium placement that I mentioned. I think it's a reality of this cycle that good exploration businesses are funded by private equity. that's where the capital has come from. Capital is not easy to find in this market, and the typical routes of institutional investors, private investors, and doing raisings on exchanges, I think, died 2 or 3 years ago. And everybody that lives in Canada knows that. The market is focused exclusively on other commodities and other sectors right now. So attracting those two and having, to a degree, the first mover advantage to bring them into the story is actually a compelling reason to invest in us. The second reason is that we will need more money at some point in the future. At some point next year, we'll embark on a new exploration stage. We'll need to pay for some options on land, G&A, and the rest. And I don't worry about where that money is going to come from, because I know that Greenstone and Tembo, and possibly some of the other institutions even, will put their share in. Whereas many businesses are concerned for two reasons. One, where will the money come from? But second, a lot of the institutional shareholders that you see these days are actually either closing, reducing, or just ending their whole dedicated mining investment strategies. So if you have shareholders like Greenstone and Tembo, you don't have those concerns. So I hear the comments that are made, but I think there's another side to this coin. And to be honest, I think it's quite a good position for Coro to have these guys as large, secure, well-funded shareholders.
Yeah, so to be honest, I fundamentally agree with that. I mean, our opinion from our seat, for whatever it's worth, is that capital is so scarce in the mining space at the moment that the pros of having the positives of having shareholders that are willing to stand behind you and fund you certainly outweigh any of the negatives from our perspective anyway. I think we've covered off most of the other questions that we've received by virtue of Lewis's earlier presentation, apart from perhaps one I've noticed here about the continuity of mineralization and subsequently the impact on that on the ultimate mine design. I mean, perhaps it's a bit early to talk about this, but we've been asked whether you're looking at a series of open pits or a large single pit, and what you know about that so far.
Yeah, if we can go back to let me go back to one of the slides here.
Oh, there we go.
So in here you can see again the high-grade cores. The mineralization, according to the drilling data that we've got, is pretty continuous on all this area that is enveloped by this green line. So that ultimately is going to be a single pit. But having said that, because we've got now these high-grade cores, obviously the starting pits should be targeting these high-grade areas, so that we can get, as soon as we can get a good grade up front in the mine plan, the better for the economics of the project. So I suspect, and we have to do all the work to confirm this, but I suspect that the mine sequence should start in an area where we are going to have a very low or almost zero strip ratio. That means the mineralization is starting from surface with good grades, which is probably going to be in this central area, what you call the high grades zone core, and then following that all the other high grade sections. But ultimately at the end of the mine plan, once we run out of high grade ore, you are going to be reclaiming all the rest of the ore, which is going to be lower grade but still economic, and therefore this is going to become as a super pit, if you like. That's again, this has to be all confirmed with engineering studies. We are starting with a PEA towards the end of this year, but that probably should be the configuration, what you're going to be seeing later in the year. Okay.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I think we've probably come to the end of our allotted time. I would, before we close out, I'd open it up to you gentlemen in terms of whether there's any other anything you want to raise or any other anything you want to present to the audience here before we sign off that we haven't covered today.
Yeah, well, if I want to mention the core opportunity that we have, I think is heavily based on Marimeca. I think we are proving that a project like that is not very easy to find elsewhere. In fact, we, as a company, we try to compare ourselves and look for peers in South America, and we couldn't find none. And that's because when companies are not looking for oxide deposits like that, they have this preconception that a project like that were not to be found anymore. But we are proving that that's not the case. And we are doing that in a country that is the premium country for mining in South America, which is Chile, which means that the risk as a company, the risk for the project is very low. The rules in Chile for mining, as a country that has got the mining culture, are very well understood. When you think about, for instance, the environmental side, the permitting side, in any other places you have to follow a process, but that process is very well understood, and if you plan ahead, you can do it. So we believe that most of the risks that other projects will carry, Marimeca doesn't have, simply like that. And in terms of the quality of the ore, it's a premium quality, and in terms of the project itself, it should be lower capex intensive as compared to any other projects because of the nature of the deposit and the location that it is. So in any angle that you see this project, there is no big risks, and I believe, if Coro gets to do it, Coro can do it, or if another company comes in with a very good offer, Coro may consider sell it, but that's a project that is going to become a mine. And therefore, again, I think it's a very good opportunity for any new investor to come in and buy into Coro story.
All right. Well, thanks very much, gentlemen, for participating today. I think we'll wrap it up there. A quick reminder that as we sign off here, that the playback for this webinar, if you missed any of it, will be available on our website. And of course, feel free to reach out to ourselves here at Red Cloud, or indeed Nick at Coro if you require any follow-up or have any additional questions that we didn't get around to today. And apologize if we didn't get around to answering your question. Okay, thank you very much for attending, and hopefully see you again soon.